Well, welcome everybody. Great to see so many people here today. I'm Glenn Ruga, the founder and director of the Social Documentary Network. And it's always so great to see so many faces from so many parts of the world. Today we have a lot of both familiar people and a lot of new faces. And from all parts of the world, we have people signed up from Australia, Bangladesh, Brazil, Bulgaria, the DRC, Egypt, Finland, and that only gets us through the beginning part of the alphabet. It's quite impressive to see where people are coming from today. The chat is open, so please let us know where you're Zooming from. And the session is being recorded and will be posted to the SDN YouTube channel in a few days. This is the first of many events that we have planned for the SDN 2024 Visual Storytelling Festival. And we're so grateful to have with us here today Ed Kashi, Adriana Zehbrauskas, and Dudley Brooks to talk about issues facing documentary photographers today. And before I turn this over to Dudley as the moderator, I'd like to say a few words about SDN and the Visual Storytelling Festival, and particularly since there are a lot of people here for the first time. The Social Documentary Network was founded in 2008 as a platform for documentary photographers to create online galleries of their projects and present them to a global audience. And to this day, this is still a core part of what we do. And I encourage any documentary photographers out there to consider using the SDN platform to showcase your projects. And in the 16 years since our founding, we've also launched a digital and print magazine, Zeke, to showcase the best work from the SDN platform. We've initiated other programs, including our speaker series, which we also refer to as Documentary Matters, and of which tonight's program is part of. We also have a very vibrant educational program, and I encourage you to consider classes we're offering this spring, including Michelle Beaugray's and Amber Bracken's classes that start next week. And then we have 3 other classes starting later in the semester. And each year we present the Zeke Awards for documentary photography and systemic change. And we'll be exhibiting this year's award recipients at Photoville in Brooklyn in June, for those of you who are either in New York or plan to be there for Photoville. And tomorrow night, we're also hosting our monthly salon, which is an informal gathering of SDN members to share work. And one of our newest and most dynamic programs are the SDN portfolio reviews. And they'll be this year on Saturday, April 20th. It's about a month away. And these are online portfolio review sessions with industry leaders in editorial, publishing, and fine art. And if you're looking for professional level feedback on your work or opportunities to publish or exhibit your work, this is the place for you. And you can learn more about all of these programs at the SCN website at socialdocumentary.net or zekemagazine.com. And I'd like to welcome today all SDN board members and advisory committee members who are here with us today. Let me just say hi to everybody. And now on to tonight's program, the kickoff for the SDN 2024 Visual Storytelling Festival. This is the first year we're doing this virtual and in-person festival, starting tonight and continuing into May with 7 panel discussions such as this, 5 classes and workshops, the portfolio reviews, and 2 exhibitions. We'll have a Q&A towards the end of this program tonight, and if you have questions, either put them in the chat or raise your digital hand. We won't be able to get to everybody, but we'll do our best. We have 2 outstanding photographers with us here tonight, Ed Kashi and Adriana Zehbrauskas, in discussion with Dudley Brooks, the Deputy Director of Photography for the Washington Post. Adriana is a Brazilian documentary photographer now based in Phoenix, Arizona. Her work focuses on issues related to migration, religion, human rights, climate change, and underrepresented communities. She's worked in more than 20 countries and contributes regularly to the New York Times, CNN, the Washington Post, The Guardian, and UNICEF. And her photographs have been featured in numerous international publications. And she's one of the newest members of the 7 Photo Agency. Ed Kashi is a prolific photojournalist and uses photography, filmmaking, and social media to explore geopolitical and social issues that define our times. He's also a dedicated educator and mentor to photographers around the world and lectures frequently on visual storytelling, human rights, and the world of media. He's covered topics as diverse as the impact of oil in Nigeria, the Protestant community in Northern Ireland, the lives of Jewish settlers in the West Bank, the impact of an aging society through his groundbreaking project, Aging in America, and the list goes on. A member of the 7 Photo Agency since 2010, Kashi has been recognized for his complex imagery and its compelling rendering of the human condition. His bio goes on for pages, and I'll stop here. And lastly, we have Dudley Brooks, the Deputy Director of Photography for the Washington Post, where he manages the production of all photo content for the features, local, and sports sections. Prior to this, Brooks was the Director of Photography and Senior Photo Editor for the monthly magazine Ebony and its weekly sister periodical, Jet. These iconic publications chronicled the African-American experience for over 70 years, and Brooks was a key member of the senior staff responsible for enhancing the editorial approach of each. We're so grateful to have these 3 amazing members of the photo community with us here tonight. And now let me turn this over to Dudley Brooks.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I first want to thank Glenn for all of his vision with the Social Documentary Network in general, but also being able to house and conceive of and arrange and orchestrate programs such as this, which could really kind of give us a lot of understanding on documentary photography and storytelling photography in general. So huge applause to you on all your efforts. Great working with you. This should be an interesting conversation because photojournalism and documentary photography is going through somewhat of a change. Technology and platform differences and different issues are coming up that photojournalists and documentary photographers have to respond to, and it's kind of a balancing act in terms of being objective and also being passionate and also not necessarily playing to issues that are affecting the world, but figuring out ways of how to interpret these issues with all of the new technology and the new platforms. And so we have a lot of things we want to kind of deal with tonight, and questions are welcome. Please ask them. Forums like this is really when you can get a lot of information from folks who actually kind of do the work and folks who are around the work and who are passionate about the work that they do. So, please take that as an opportunity. So in prep, Ed Kashi sent some notes. And there was one thing that he said I'd like to kind of like toss out as something to jump off on. And he had as a statement, which I've kind of shortened, but he said, in general, we all face the challenges of image oversaturation. Too much focus on all that's negative in the world and not enough stories of resilience and humanity. And I kind of wanted to toss this to Adriana kind of first to kind of get her response to that. How do you take that, Adriana, and how does that affect what you're currently doing?
Well, actually, I think that I have been a few of my last stories, I have been focusing on that, not just me, myself, Adriana, but who I'm working with. I have one of the stories, I can give you a clear example of a story that I worked on. That was a story in Haiti that was published last year. And as you know, Haiti is drowning in horrific stories and gang violence. And we were there working on a series of stories. And in one of these stories, we focused on an organization run by a nun who runs schools for boys and girls that are being evacuated from neighborhoods that are being under gang control. And some of these places where she puts these kids, these children, it becomes so much that she ran out of space, and she had to rent other houses to house women and girls that were being threatened to being raped. So we ran the story about her and her organization, and the impact we had was so enormous. The amount of people, readers, actually calling us and the paper and me as a photographer, the writer, to what can we do to help? Because I think that, we do have to expose what is going on and the terrible stories and the horrific things. But I think that when people see this, they become paralyzed. The readers like, and what can I do, right, to help? And then I think it's so important that we kind of, show a way that we as a society, as community, can come together and not just be a witness to that, but actually being part of it in even the smallest way, right? So I think that it's one of the stories that I worked on. And recently, also last year, I worked for a story for CNN, which was about climate change. But then I decided to focus on a story about how women in Brazil were fighting for access to a palm tree, but then and the fight they were having, and the fight was just not for access to the palm tree, but for freedom themselves and everything they have achieved so far. So it was a story about, success, and not just the story of a desperation and sadness. So I think that, and also always the results of those stories are very positive, and it's really overwhelming.
Yeah, so is that so that's definitely a conscious effort. But when you go into a situation, are you kind of researching that? Are you specifically looking to find where the in is in terms of trying to find something that has a lot more depth to
Yeah,
it?
I think, I struggle consciously in my work to always, portray people in the most dignified way possible. I think that this is an effort that I do consciously. It doesn't matter what kind of situation. But in the case of the Haiti story, it wasn't something that we set out to do. It was something that we were hearing a lot of horrible stories, and then we heard about this organization, and then so we went there, and then it was like, okay, we have to talk about this. The world had to know what is, that people are doing here, that it's not just, you know, uh, uh, desperation and and horror. So I think that it's a balance of that, but I really think that it's more common now for me than it was in the past. I don't know for you, Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I love your examples, and I'd like to pick up on that. I can't remember who coined the term, but solutions journalism. I
Hmm.
was a writer at the New York Times. But anyway, that to me, that I would say for the past 10 years has really started to inform not only the ideas and the projects I choose, but how I choose to develop them. And it's not so much because editors want that, although I will say that increasingly editors do want, like as they say, doom and gloom. So we just sold a
Hmm.
pitch to the Smithsonian Magazine to do a story about, so Miami inaugurated the first heat officer of any city in the world 2 years ago to address the inescapable reality of climate change and a warmer planet. And Florida is sort of ground zero or frontline for that. And so as we're talking to the editors there and developing it, and the photo editor at the Smithsonian is a wonderful woman, Quentin Nardi, it's clear that they also want to make sure it's not a doom and gloom story. So
Hmm.
as an example, it wouldn't be okay to just go and show agricultural workers sweating and getting sick, and construction workers, unable to work because of the heat. That we also want to show ways that, in this case, the city is trying to mitigate the problems and the impacts associated with with heat stress. And then another aspect of this, I was just in Eagle Pass, Texas, just a week ago. I'm working on a personal project, a book with my wife, Julie Winokur, who's a writer. And the reality is that there is no invasion of the border there. Yes, in November and December, it was absolutely an unprecedented number of people. And what upsets me is that why isn't the media there now talking about the fact that things have calmed down? And Dudley, this is where I'd like to turn it over to you, because you're sort of in the you're in the control room of a lot of these decisions, and I wonder, we all know, if it bleeds, it leads, that whole, trope about media. And I do believe to a large degree it's still true. But Dudley, I'd love to hear, like, whatever you can say, the sort of glimpse into the conversations, the news editorial meetings of the Washington Post, where, is there this kind of desire for more solutions journalism and not when we talk about positive stories, we're not saying we shouldn't continue to shine a light on the problems of the world. We should never stop doing that. But I think what we additionally need to do is to show solutions, or whether it's an individual or an organization or a government or a corporation, I don't really care what the entity is, but that are working to try to solve it. So we don't leave viewers and readers feeling hopeless, which Adriana sort of addressed. So Dudley, I'd love to.
I think there's a difference to an extent on covering the news and covering what happened. But also, I mean, I've always found it more important when I was photographing, and even when I'm assigning stories to photographers on different things, I'm always trying to figure out a way of how you can kind of explain to the public why something's happening to a certain extent. Because there's the fine line that you've got to walk between objectivity and then also kind of telling a story and getting behind the issue so folks kind of understand that. But I think that's where points of view come in, and I think that it is very, very possible to be fair when you tell a story in terms of telling both sides, but also think it's important to really kind of take the public into the behind the scenes thing. And some of that takes a little bit of point of view, but I wouldn't even necessarily say it's point of view. It's more so the interest of what that photographer, what that particular journalist is interested in, and follow your interest. If it's interesting to you, it could be interesting to a lot of other people. And if you document someone or a situation that sheds light on how people deal with specific situations, or what people are doing to help themselves in particular situations, or to address different problems, as opposed to just hammering on the issue itself, I think it just brings a lot more nuance and a lot more perspective to that type of coverage. But I mean, has that changed, from the time that we all got into business? Do you see that as something that now is a lot more prevalent, or do you think that the overriding opinion is to kind of just tell the story from where it is and then just keep on moving with that particular narrative?
Well, if I may, Adriana.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I think, another aspect of this is the sort of stylistic, the approach, the changes in stylistic approaches that sort of the new generations of photographers are definitely deploying more aesthetic approaches, both in the way they capture, but also in the way they treat or tone their work. And that really changes the complexion of the work. Either it can make it more dramatic, or, like I think of someone like Mark Peterson's work on, politics. He's brilliant, amazing photographer and great person. And, but his work is so, if anyone is familiar with it, and it's mostly, you see it in the New York Times, the New Yorker, New York Magazine, many of the major publications, he's one of the prime people covering politics, but he makes everybody look really harsh and really bad in a way. And I, as a consumer and someone who cares about our democracy, I am concerned that while I can read that with the sort of photographic language, and appreciate it, I am concerned that it might turn people off further to politics, just as an example. Now, then there's someone like John Moore, who has dedicated the last 15 plus years of his life to covering the issue of migration along the border. And, his work would be considered more straightforward. And I don't say that at all in a derogatory way, but where basically his mission is to capture what is happening in real time with real people with no interference. So there's this real kind of much broader spectrum of how the photographic language is being used to tell documentary and journalistic stories, which I think is a very good thing, because it enriches the medium, it challenges viewers. But and then there's the aspect of what we choose to photograph. And I would say that what I'm seeing is a trend globally of work that is more memoirish and related to personal experience, less outward looking, and more portrait oriented, quite frankly.
Adriana,
Mhm.
what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Ed, and I think I like to put myself in a category that's kind of like halfway. I think this new generation, and then more straightforward kind of Joe Moore. I'm a very, I like to consider myself a very old school photographer in the sense that I'm a photojournalist, and for me, it's reality. I have to be as close and truthful to reality as I can possibly can without losing my sense of aesthetics and poetry and whatever you may call that magical thing that we try to convey through our photographs. But I am more of a straightforward person in the sense that I don't overcolor my photos, like in the sense of toning. I don't undersaturate my images. I don't make a story have kind of like a special mood. I believe in keeping things as they are. And I'm not saying this is good and bad. This is how I am as a photographer. And I feel that, there's room for everyone. But I feel that, in the world of photojournalism, there are not, in which I think I am, I don't think there's a lot of room for over stories that delve too much into just the good side of things. Honestly, I think that the examples that I gave you, the Haiti example and the CNN example, and I have my personal project that's Family Matters, which is something completely different, but it's also a positive thing coming out of a horrible story. And they're not very common, although this is what I'm striving to do. But I have to be honest that there's not a lot of room for it, in publishing. I think, in at least, for the media that I work with, which is mostly, we're covering, I cover a lot of hard news and breaking stories. So yeah, I don't know what would you think? What do you? I would love to hear your opinion. You've been an editor and.
Well, I was going to ask, do you think that platforms have made a difference? Photographers who don't necessarily work for or sell a lot of work to organizations and magazines and newspapers and whatnot, they post a lot of things on IG, or they put a lot of things on Facebook, and you can do things with social media platforms that you can't necessarily do with traditional publishing houses.
Yeah, well,
I think that drives that a little bit.
I think it might, but again, like I see myself like, the photographer that I am, that I do for any editorial client that I have, and my social media, the work I post on my Instagram feed, for instance. I mean, it follows the exact same ethics standards, and I'm not a different photographer. Maybe, like I allow myself a little bit more poetry in there because, it's, but for me, I see myself, what you see there is what you get, really, but maybe, I have a little bit more leeway to, post some photos that wouldn't have the space in my editorial work. And I don't know, I think it is a way to put something out there that you cannot place anywhere else, not in the sense of, that I won't be as ethical with my work as I would be with a client, because I think that today people have access to you through social media, right? So I have a very interesting anecdote, if you may. I was doing a story in El Salvador about violence and the new president, and we were tipped about a horrific story about two brothers that were assassinated in a small village, and we went there, and as we arrived, it was a small village, a small house. There were the bodies of the two boys were in the house. So I arrived there, I put my camera away, and I went to talk with the mother. So can you imagine the situation, right? She's there with the two coffins in her living room, And I introduced myself and I said, oh, hi, you know, like I'm a photojournalist. I'm working for a story for this outlet. I understand what's going on, and I would, you know, I explained the whole story, why I was working on, and why I would like to photograph it. And I asked if I could, right? So she looked at me and she said, wait a minute, I'm going to call my daughter to talk to you. And then I thought she was gonna, you know, her daughter was gonna come, an adult, you know, to talk to me. And then comes this girl, she's 15 years old. And, you know, she looks at me, she said, so you want to photograph? I'm like, yeah. She's like, do you have an Instagram account? And I said, I do. She's like, can I see it? So I pull out my phone and I put my Instagram account and I show it to her. She looks at the photos that is there. And she's like, okay, you can photograph, but if you promise you're going to post the photo here. I think that, you know, with the photos, I mean, who I am as a photographer is there, and my credibility is there. And you know, for me to be able to do that work, you know, she saw that, okay, this is what I can see from what she does, you know. So I think from that day, I mean, I was already, you know, very strict with what I post, but after that day, I was like, this is no joke, right?
Right.
It's
It's amazing how we can be held accountable now, even before we arrive. Like there are times where I've arrived on location and the
Mhm.
people have like vetted me through my website or social media, which also
Yeah.
means you need to be careful. You need to be thoughtful
And
about what you put on your social media.
exactly. You have to be very careful about what you put in your social media. And also, people can reach out to you. So when I'm doing my work for my editorial clients, like whenever a story is getting published, I get so nervous because I know that what if I did a mistake? What if I misspelled something? What if I didn't get that right? What am I gonna get? So until it's out and okay, it's fine, nothing happened. Okay, okay, I can breathe and go on. So I feel like I feel that I'm a lot more responsible for, who I am, like publicly, so my persona in my social media is very important, because this is who I am. And if I don't take care of that, I won't be able to do the work that I do.
Mhm.
I
And
need
it's
people to trust
interesting.
me.
I remember the days when you could blacken the sky, or you can burn in anything, or you could tone whatever you can burn. Those days are pretty much done, for photojournalism or for documentary photography. I'm sure there are
Mhm.
people that are still doing them in art genres, but for documentary photography,
Right.
you have a much more narrow leeway in terms of how you can establish your own individual style as a photographer.
Mhm.
It's been interesting for me watching different photographers try to figure out ways of how to do that with their own work, to make sure that you can tell it's their vision, but also
Mhm.
it's not stepping over any lines or stepping over any rules, because so many people can now evaluate your work. I mean, we'll get to Kate Middleton
Yeah.
later
And
on in the conversation, but that type of thing. So, do you think that is it harder to pitch stories now to publications, or where are the main venues? What kind of feedback are you getting from the main venues in terms of being able to pitch stories and tell stories and be brought on board to do them?
is
That
that
seems.
for me or Ed? Ed?
Well, I'll say, because I've been doing this a little longer than you, I would say yes, it's definitely harder. But you know, yeah, it's definitely harder. And also, one of the ways it's changed is there's more scrutiny about, are you the one to be able to do it? Or are you the one who should do it? That was never a question, 30, 40 years ago. And so that adds like another wrinkle or another hurdle, if you like, that you need to overcome when you're pitching and proposing. So
Mhm.
there's just less volume, there's smaller budgets. But having said that, this has never been an easy profession. So,
Yeah.
it's not for the weak and the weary here. You need to really be able to get pushed down and rejected and pick yourself back up and keep on moving forward. So in my view, as long as you believe in what you're doing and your heart and your soul are
Yeah.
in the right place, in alignment with your ideas, then you will be able to eventually succeed. I will also say that, and this goes back to what we were just talking about, the importance of personal projects. the
Mhm.
importance of self-initiating things,
Mhm.
because that also, well, it gets back to what we were talking about earlier. You're then freer to photograph what you want to photograph and how you want to, excuse me, photograph it. And so, that's another important element of working on long-term projects. When you're working on assignment for clients, obviously you've got to get what they need, and often it
Mhm.
can really, limit or hamstring your ability to be creative or to look, down different alleyways of a story. You need to make sure you nail what they want.
Yeah, I agree, and I think especially with the special the personal projects, I think that is what I always try to tell my students, to do, because it's the only way that you will find yourself as a photographer, who you really are, because you have the creative freedom to do whatever you want, and in your own time, and and space. So I think it's really really important, and I think for me that's how it worked. I feel like my life is really like my personal projects feed on my editorial work, and my editorial work also feeds on my personal projects, and there is this symbiosis. And I think, of course, I'm just one person, and when I'm working for a client, obviously I'm going to dive deep into who I am as a photographer, from the time and experience that I had doing my own work. And that said, I think that pitching stories, it's hard for me, because like long stories, because it takes so much time for me to go and do that and report them. And I feel that it's really hard, in the sense that when you pitch a story for a client, a big story, you have to spend so much time and resources to do that, and at the same time you have to keep working and paying the bills, and so it's really a balance of how much time can you put yourself into a work that it's not paying you anything, that's not giving you anything back, but at the same time you need financially, you need the resources to keep doing the work, and eventually pitching the story and seeing it published. So I feel that it's that in that sense it's harder too, because the industry is harder now, as we all know, and so I feel that I have less time to do that. Time meaning financial resources, and then you have to be applying for grants, and
Yeah.
and all this is very, very time consuming. And that said, I do not I really think it's important, and I keep doing my own personal projects. And the way I go about it, I mean, mostly is I do stories that are really close to me, like really geographically close to me, that places that allow me to go back and forth, that I will not have to make a huge, effort, financial and logistics, that I can do it while I have a day off, and can drive for half an hour, 45 minutes, or get on, on the subway, like I did the whole Tepito story in Mexico City for 2 years, because I could just get on the subway and go there. And then when I start doing it, I just don't know what's going to be. And then the stories start getting, a life in itself. And it's, and then it becomes a book, or it becomes a documentary. And I never set out to, oh, this is going to be a story like this, like a format, like completely, structure. I feel like it, it gets, it changes along the road, and I'm really open to that. So
I
yeah,
have,
maybe for me it's harder to pitch stories.
I have to say though, when I look at photographers' portfolios, with especially new photographers, and I'm scrolling through to look to see who I want to assign, whatever. I mean, it could be, and this goes across all different genres, whether it's portraiture or photojournalism or whatever. I always go to personal work first.
Mm,
Always
you're
go to the personal folder first. And then when I talk to the photographer, I will say, well, can you do this the way that you did your personal story? Because that's where I feel I'm really kind of getting the photographer's voice a lot more, because
mm-hmm.
I'm not basing it off of, well, I'm not looking at work that's based off of this publication wanted this, that publication wanted that. I really choose to try to get the photographer's voice. And I usually always see it in personal projects.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
Yeah.
Adriana, you make such a great point that you don't have to travel halfway around the world to find great stories and great projects to devote yourself to.
Mhm.
That I think is always has been a trope or a idea in photojournalism. You know, you have to go to
Yeah.
Gaza now, or Afghanistan, or Iraq,
Uh-huh.
or wherever, and or now Haiti. And the reality is that there's really important, great stories all around us.
I agree. And as much as I really love to travel, I mean, who doesn't, right? And it's I think it's fascinating. And as a journalist, a photojournalist, to go to other countries, other cultures, and being given this chance to witness those communities and societies. But I really feel that we have this opportunity that to tell stories that are close to us, and they're also important. I feel that I've always been a much more photographer that was locally, in the sense, first Brazil, then I moved to Mexico and I was doing stories in that region, and now here I do. Although I do travel to other countries, I spent a month in Sudan, or eventually, but I mean, the bulk of my work is always more local to where I'm based, and I think that really what makes my work stronger is this ability to go back and forth, and delve deeper, and so get more intimate, and I think stronger work, I think.
How creative do you have to get with funding now in terms of like doing like not the local ones, but doing the projects that are a little bit more expansive or longer
Yeah.
term? How creative do you have to be now in terms of financing to at least get them started and then get some momentum going?
How creative or how in debt? No. Um,
I think funding it's a big issue. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It is a big issue, even here, not even to do big projects. Like, I live in Phoenix and Yuma, the border, it's a 3-hour ride from here. But a hotel room in Yuma, I mean, I'm not kidding, a roadside hotel costs $150 a night. So if I want to go and spend a week doing just migration at 3 hours from me, I'm going to spend $1,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. But Dudley, to address that question, well, that was serious, my joke, but seriously, or more constructively,
That was constructive though.
it's true. We can all have a debt party, but no, is that, you need to be, again, I was able to have a taste of, the 26-week contracts with the National Geographic. So I had a taste of that sort of glory period, but now that doesn't exist. So now I need to be more creative in terms of my sources of funding. It might be academia, it might be the NGO nonprofit foundation world. Obviously grants, going for grants, and then what ends up happening is excuse me, even if you get Time Magazine or the Smithsonian as an example that's coming up, what they're paying barely, like, one cannot make a living off of it.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe if you're in your early 20s and you have no kids and you don't plan to buy a house or have any kind of even a middle-class lifestyle, it might suffice. So the reality is that the way I view it now, in a sense, is it's been a paradigm shift where I am not relying on the editorial world for income, although whatever I can get, I welcome. I'm looking for other sources of funding to be able to create the field work, and then use the editorial world to disseminate it, because the editorial world still has,
the power, impact.
Yeah, impact, reach, veracity, all that stuff. So that's kind of the way I view it now. I would say, really in the last 10, 15 years, I've seen that shift and tried to navigate these new waters, if you like. So yeah.
But you have the absolute best filing system that I've ever heard of anybody have. And so
that's a different seminar. No.
That's a different seminar. But it's an important thing, because you set yourself up to where you and I can mention Bruce Tallerman, in Los Angeles. I mean, also just kept up with work that he's shot over the past 50 years. But you can put your hands on any of your images, and that's also a thing to really kind of that you've done to set yourself up to where that's like a little bit of a relief that you know that your work will start working for you.
Absolutely. And I mean, there was a period up until the 2008 crash where, you know, half of my income was from the resale from my archives. I mean, it was a very significant income stream that unfortunately, especially for the kind of work that like Adriana and I do, which is more subject oriented, more journalistic, as opposed to commercial imagery, it's the market for that has really declined both in maybe yeah in volume, but definitely in price, you know, what we get for, you know, even when images sell. So that is not a reliable part of, you know,
Oh
the
yeah,
income
no,
stream.
not at all.
Just isn't. It's still there and it's meaningful because it means that our work is being used and seen. But for me, the enduring benefit of having, you know, really been diligent about building my archive is my last four books were all derived from my archive. And I've actually just donated my archive to the Briscoe Center for American Studies at Austin, Texas. So, you know, I'm now seeing the benefit of that, not so much in a financial value, but in a like legacy. You know,
Mhm.
that someone now, if they want to, can delve into my work and use it for the reasons I wanted to create, which to communicate and to tell stories and to have impact. And it takes the sort of commercial part of it out of that equation. So, but again, it's the age and stage of my career and my, you know, the evolution of my arc that makes sense. But for regardless of your age and stage, you should start organizing your work so that for every reason under the sun, for to gain the most value out of it financially, for the sort of spiritual and soulful reasons of that you can access your work, then there's the creative opportunities that come out of it. There's this amazing quote by Don McCullen, for those of you who don't know who he is. He's probably in his 80s now, but a British photojournalist. And I once went to his lecture and he talked about how when he'd be sleeping at night, he could hear his negatives talking to each other. And I thought that was such a beautiful metaphor for this idea that, I've created all these bodies of work on aging, on the Kurds, on heat stress, on and on and on. But when you look at them outside of those silos or subject areas, they start to communicate and interact, and that is a really exciting and beautiful
Interesting.
thing.
Why don't we see if we can bring some of the audience in for questions now? I don't see any in chat, so if people have questions, go ahead and put them or raise your hand and we'll call on you. But let me prime the pump. Ed, you're talking about alternative ways to fund projects. Can you talk specifically about one project and how you did that?
Okay. Well, I'll give two examples. So one is a one-off project that I did 2 years ago. I've been wanting to do deal with the issue of heat stress on manual laborers around the world. And with the run up to the World Cup, I developed a pitch with a fellow filmmaker, Tom LaFay, who's based in Bogota, Colombia, to go to Nepal and Qatar. So we would show, because there's something like 6,500 Nepalese workers had died working on World Cup construction sites in Qatar. So it took 2 years for us to sell that, but Time Magazine eventually picked it up. But because Time doesn't have the budgets, they got a Pulitzer Center grant and then a Thomson Reuters grant, or agreement to invest money, so that Tom and I could go for a total of maybe 3 weeks both to Nepal and Qatar in total to do that field work. We created a 30-minute film, and I created a short photo essay, and then that was eventually published in Time, in print and online. It was a cover story. So that's an example of like a one-off story. But over the last decade, I've been working on a project about chronic kidney disease around the world. And that's an example of how it began with a small commission to go to Nicaragua. And then because I was so taken by what was going on there, I decided to make it my next personal project. And over the past decade, you know, I've gotten, you know, $5,000 grants, $15,000 grants, you know, shown at Perpion, you know, magazine sales, newspaper sales, you know, online sales, you know, just like such. Oh, I did one crowdfunding at one point. So that to me is a real template for how the modern photojournalist creates and sustains a personal project. That you know, whereas just what was it in 2000, Julie and I got, like, you know, a $210,000 grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to do Aging in America. I don't believe that stuff exists anymore.
Wow.
You know, I don't, or if it is, someone please tell me. But you know, and so much of this, like life, so much of it is timing. But anyway, so there's different ways to fund, and it really depends on the level or degree of your ambition, of your ideas. You know, that if you want to do like one story, there's one approach. But then if, you know, I'm always looking at long-term projects. That's just how I've always worked. And so anyway, I hope that helped.
Those are great examples. Yeah, thanks for that. So we do have a question from an audience member, Olivia Bowden, put in the chat. Why has funding decreased so significantly, and do you anticipate it rising again as media evolves?
I think that's more for Dudley.
I'll give you an example. Like I left the Washington Post. I was a photographer there for 21 years. I left there to go into editing 2007, 2005. And I came back, I bummed around in different places, and I came back in 2014. So between 2005 and 2014, when I was a photographer here, and this is not just the Post, this is a bunch of other places. You know, I mean, it was a regular thing for photographers to go off and be on assignment for like 2 months, you know, or more, depending on what the assignment was. And then when I come back, that period of time had significantly shortened because of, you know, budget issues or just, you know, I guess, you know, do you need that much time to do an assignment? And so, you know, a lot of things changed in that respect in terms of how much money that I think a lot of companies are putting into like everything that they do. I think that their companies will put significant budget into the things that they really, really want to do, you know. But in terms of like casting that wide net that used to happen, not quite sure that we'll ever see it to the extent that we saw it before. And I'm looking at magazines doing the same thing, you know. Every publication's kind of going through those changes, and I think that a lot of organizations are trying to figure out like what is next. You know, where is the next venue? Social media is a big thing. Okay, fine. So you can do social media. But, you know, the bottom line is that you still have to generate the work to post on social media. I mean, so I think what I try to encourage photographers to do is to, one, always have ideas. And even photographers at the Washington Post or wherever, but just always have ideas. And so be willing to figure out ways of just how to work on them and start working on them, regardless of, you know, whether you have a place to put it or whether you have the funding for it. Just start on the process. And you'll find that once you start, things have a way of opening up to where you can continue. And then, you know, financing kind of happens for some people, but do your research first, you know, figure out what the idea is that you want to do and do the due diligence. And, you know, like what a lot of what the two of you have talked about, being passionate is always going to be a key factor. That's always going to like make things happen for you.
Yeah,
So,
and choose something that really, you know, is important to you in some level that, you know, impacts you in a personality, because it's going to be hard. I mean, it's, you know, it's hard. And even after, I think that you know, when you're able to fund the project or, you know, sell it. And I don't think we ever get back everything we put into it, you know, in terms of time and money. And so you have to be working on something that really gives you a lot of joy, or, you know, a lot of, you know, uh, a return in, you know, more of like a spiritual, soulful, you know, that really fulfills you, you know, in some level. I think so. You also be able, then you also be able for that, so that you can be able to keep going, you know, and doing that work, I think.
We have another interesting question from the audience from Sarah Barker. And Sarah, pardon if I don't quite interpret exactly the question correctly, but do you involve people you are photographing to enable them to tell their own stories?
Wow. Increasingly, I do and we do increasingly, and especially over the last 23 years, I've worked a lot in video and short documentary, that form of filmmaking. So that is a beautiful aspect of that medium, is invariably you are trying to capture the voice or allow the voice of the subjects to tell their own story. In photojournalism, you know, both traditionally and even today, I mean, you can do that in captions or, you know, whatever. There's audio, there's many ways in like multimedia forms to do that. But I would just say in general, I will speak not only for myself, but because I have the wonderful opportunity to mentor people all over the world of all ages, is that this is something that is just, I see increasing in general in people's work, is a desire to include the, you know, the voices and the point of view of our subjects more. At least that's what I'm seeing in my experience.
I think COVID had something to do with that too. I think that being locked down for 2 years, 3 years, whatnot, I watched photographers' approach change, because a lot of people started turning the camera inward on themselves to an extent, you know, because of the isolation. And then when they came back out to photograph people, they had a whole different type of sensitivity in terms of how they handled their subject matter, because they spent time photographing the things that were closest to them, either their family or themselves in a lot of cases. And I ran a few of those stories, and they were just really, really well done. And you could kind of see how photographers treated themselves, their own photographs very sensitively, and then consequently, I think a lot of that work kind of got out in the street, you know, in terms of how they handled other people as well.
Emily Whitney asks, referring back to Ed's question about today, editors want to know if you're the right person. How have you answered that question, Ed, when somebody says, are you the right person to do this project? Is it a personal connection, or what's the answer to that question?
Yeah, well, this is tied into identity politics and this sort of cultural phenomenon and, you know, discussion and shift that is taking place. So for instance, while my heart is, you know, deeply connected to civil rights and minority rights, you know, it would be very difficult for me to sell a story idea on the African American community now, whereas in the past that wouldn't have been the case. That's just one example. Or, you know, I have worked in over 100 countries. You know, why should I go to the Gambia to tell a story about, you know, pregnant women, you know, or why should, as a man, I do a story that is a female oriented story? So now these aren't hard lines, but I just feel that that is something that has absolutely happened. And in fact, it's even sometimes, not sometimes, it's increasingly being like asked if anyone has gone for one of these National Geographic Society grants, not the magazine, the society. That is actually an explicit question, you know, like sort of, why are you qualified to do this? I understand the reasons, and, you know, beyond the identity politics discussion, you know, in some ways it makes a lot of sense. But what I don't like about it is that, you know, we're basically talking about the insider versus outsider point of view. And what has been lacking traditionally in this profession is the insider view, especially with, you know, people of color and women and, you know, communities that are, yeah, those communities. So in that sense, it's a positive development that, and it's been amazing, like to hear these incredibly creative and passionate voices come out of the African American community or the Latino community, or obviously women have always been brilliant. That's never a question, you know. So anyway, but I am frustrated that I might sincerely be passionate about something and now I won't even try to address it. So to finish, what I'm doing, because I'm always trying to figure out how to have a positive approach to things, is what do I care about that I can do? Well, I'm a first generation American, so I can absolutely do stories in immigration. And I've been working on a project for the last 10 years called Newest Americans out of Newark, New Jersey on that. I can absolutely do a story on aging, not because I'm aging, no, but, you know, because I have the bona fides for that with all the work I've done over decades. I can do a story, I can work on projects around healthcare. So, you know, like what it's forced me to do is, in a sense, narrow the potential stories and themes and issues I might choose to focus on, but those are still really rich subject areas to cover. So I don't know, Dudley and Adriana, how you, or anyone, how you guys, what you think of that, but that's the state of affairs.
Adriana, I was going to let you go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. I feel like, you know, as Ed said, like I feel like, okay, there's a lot of stories I can do. I can do a lot of stories, you know, migration. I think I'm, you know, I'm also a migrant here, not first generation, I'm total migrant here. And also, but you know, my family migrated, you know, and I do that, women's issues, but also in a sense that, you know, I don't want to feel that I can only do those stories, you know, as Ed said, like, I mean, I'm passionate about all other things and so many things that, you know, I don't know, I feel like, I don't know, I would like to hear your opinion as someone that's, you know, assigning people to do that. And you know, for instance, I live in Arizona, I live, you know, near Navajo Nation, and, you know, Native Americans stories, and really, I'm really passionate about that. And but I do understand, you know, if a story is assigned to a Native American photographer, and but, you know, at the same time, I feel like, you know, will I, you know, can I do it, or can I, or no, can I even, you know, propose a story like that, you know? And so it's hard. Yeah.
I really think that, you know, I think things are opening up to a point of where there are a lot more people that are invited to the party now, you know, that are dancing, you know, at the party. And that's just really, really important, because for a long time it just wasn't like that. And that crosses over that crosses over a lot of different genres of photography, not just photojournalism, but even in fashion photography and commercial photography. I mean, you look up now and there are photographers of a lot of different genders and races and cultures and whatnot that are actually kind of all in the mix. And I think that's just a great thing for the industry. I would say, though, that individual perspectives are always going to be important. And sometimes as an editor, I want an insider point of view, but then sometimes as an editor, I want an outside point of view too.
Foreign eye. A foreign eye. Yeah. And
yeah, I think both of those are important, and it just really depends on the story, and it also depends on what individual photographers will bring to that subject matter. You know, and I think that the fact that a lot of things have opened up will kind of force the industry and force other photographers to kind of reevaluate how we all kind of look at things, you know, and say, okay, fine. Wow, this person this is an interesting perspective. Well, maybe I might want to try something different. But I think there's always going to be room for different perspectives. And the problem is, well, not problem. I hate using the word problem. The challenge is being able to get them published in different publications. But again, social media has just been amazing in terms of putting work out in the street and seeing what other people do. And the more perspectives that are out there that we can kind of see and that we can kind of witness and see how different people handle different situations is only going to enhance what all the rest of us do. You know, so I think that's where the big learning experience happens in terms of just kind of understanding that there are differences, you know, and difference is a good thing.
Yeah.
I just
I'm gonna
remember.
segue to another question, and maybe we'll make this the last question from Josh Carlson Benzon. He asked, what advice do you have for young photographers using social media for photojournalism and documentary photography?
It's a lot. That's a lot. Be honest. Be honest about what you're putting up. You know, try to put up enough work to where it can kind of give people a perspective. You know, the thing about social media, a lot of times, it's almost like sending a text to an extent. You know, you can't necessarily, you send a text to somebody and it's kind of just words. You can't get the inflections of how they mean what they wrote. And a lot of times you know, if you don't have like some descriptive words, it can kind of be misinterpreted. Be careful about what you put up and put enough work up to where you give the person some context in terms of who's viewing it, you know. Understand that once it's out there, it's out there. And you know, even though you can take it down, it's never really going to go away. So you're very intentional about the work you put out, and be fair to your subject matter. You know, I think that's probably my biggest thing is just be fair to your subject matter and be careful about putting things that could exploit people unnecessarily. So.
Yeah, I agree. You have to be respectful and you have to understand that, you know, this work, photojournalism, it's not about you, it's about your subject, about your story. And so it's not a place for you to be arrogant or to be, you know, bragging. I think, you know, that's how I see it. I feel that it's also a place where, you know, you have to be careful because you're building, you know, your credibility as a photojournalist. That's all you have is credibility. If you lose that, you cannot do your work. So I mean, I cannot enforce that enough, you know, how important that is and how careful you have to be with it. It takes a lifetime to build it, but you can lose it in you know, in 5 minutes. And then, so, you know, keep your standards really high. I mean, in the sense of, you know, being ethical and being respectful and being truthful and accurate, you know.
I agree.
Want to add something to that?
No, I agree with what these guys have said. Absolutely.
All right, that was a short question. Let me just do one more and we'll make this the last question from Lisa Dubois. Can you give us an idea of 2 things you feel is vital to include in your pitch when trying to sell a story? And this is directed towards Ed specifically, but anybody can answer that.
Why well, and this is based on what the feedback and what I see in both grant applications and also from editors, which is why, not only why is it important, but why now? You know, why should it be done now? I would say those are probably, I mean, if you're going to reduce it to those to 2 things, those would probably be it. You know, why is it important and why do it now? I wonder, Dudley, I don't know if you, but the days of like evergreen stories it's not, I don't know. It used to be like you could come up with stories that we say are evergreen and there was more room, it seemed, in the editorial space for that. I don't know. It feels like there's not as much room for that.
Yeah, I think it's much more, you know, like specific and,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And also to really be clear what you're pitching to whom, like, you know, whatever, like, you know, you want to make sure you've done your due diligence and your due diligence and your homework to know that this particular issue or idea is going to be appropriate for, you know, publication XYZ, you know, so you don't come off as a fool, quite frankly, you know, because that's another way to like never get a response is if it's clear you're not being smart about, you know, who you're pitching, what you're pitching to whom.
Yeah. I would say include why now, like Ed said, but also why your perspective is important. You know, tell me why what you want to do is relevant and why people need to pay attention to it based off of your perspective, your pitch, your idea. Give it some depth and give it some meaning, you know. Who is it going to reach? Who does it need to reach? You know, and how are you going to get it there? And also how you're going to execute it. How can you make it happen? And what do you already have in place that will assure me that you can make it happen, as opposed to just giving an idea? An idea is just what it is. It's an idea. A story is something that's a lot more concentrated and much more thought out and has a direction that you're going to take somebody in.
Yeah. Really, really important points what Dudley just said. Really important.
Mhm.
All right, well, why don't we bring this to a close? We want to keep this to an hour. We've gone a little bit over, but I really want to thank our panelists tonight, and I want to thank everybody for coming. If you want to unmute yourself and applaud.
Or
And
heckle.
you can check out our other programs. Just go to the SDN website. They're all there. Got another 2 months of panel discussions, classes, exhibitions, and the portfolio reviews. And this will be on the video. This will be on the SDN YouTube channel in a few days. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Dudley. Thank
Thanks
you,
to
Adriana.
everybody. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.